if we go back to the genesis of my transformation, when I was 22 years old, I was that guy disheveled, living under a bridge, pushing a shopping cart, struggled with my mental health, substance use disorder. And I sat down beside a man on a park bench, and I got to know him. His name was Gus, and he had these beautiful blue eyes. I'll never forget them. And he looked at me with this compassion and love. Got to know my name, and I remember he leaned in and he said to me, he says, Joe, he says, you got this homeless addiction thing going on. But if you were to get your life together, you could go out and do something fantastic. He said to me, Joe, there's more to you than you can see. There's more to you than you can see. And for the first time in my life, someone other than my mom or my daddy spoke to my potential, my possibility. And right now, more than ever, the world needs to see possibility.
Welcome to the Kindness Factor podcast, sharing life-changing personal stories of the transformational impact of deep kindness. Hosted by
Dr. Elia, the happiness doctor,
and Randy McNeely, the kindness giver. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to the first episode of the Kindness Factor podcast for 2025. We are totally thrilled and privileged to have a wonderful and amazing man by the name of Joe Roberts joining us today. And I just want to share a couple things about Joe. He is the winner of what is called the Courage to Come Back Award. And he was recently awarded the Meritorious Service Medal from the Governor General of Canada. Now, Joe is the epitome of change. His life hasn't always been good. He's a CEO now of a wonderful company. But in fact, 25 years ago, he puts a shopping cart in Vancouver's notorious downtown east side as a homeless addict. Joe's story is one of perseverance, determination, resiliency of the human spirit. He is a living testament to the idea that anything is possible. And he lives that. And he's going to share a little bit more about that with us today as we discuss how kindness has impacted his life and what led him to being where he is today. Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us.
Thanks for having me, Randy.
This is my wonderful partner, Dr. Elia Gourgouris. My goodness, I forgot to introduce.
It's okay.
Dr. Elia, I'm batting 1,000 today, but that's okay. Elia, where are you coming to us from?
I'm coming from Los Angeles, just out here helping family and friends who have been impacted and devastated by the fires and who've lost everything literally. So it's been, quite the last couple of weeks.
Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine. So, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. I do want to dive into that a little bit, but we want, Joe, the first question we normally ask, and I'm sure you've got a whole lot of stories to tell. First of all, before we jump into the questions, though, tell people a little bit about your background as far as what made you decide to walk across Canada. And then we're going to ask you, in that experience, if you could think of some stories where people were kindness heroes to you, where they stepped into the shoes of a kindness hero and how that impacted you. Would you be willing to do that?
Sure. I had been speaking professionally for a number of years, and I had sold my company in 2003, and I wanted to do something to pay it forward, to draw attention to youth mental health, to some of the antecedents that we see that create an environment where kids find themselves displaced or on the street or wrapped up in all kinds of different things. So we came up with this simple thing, push a shopping cart, a symbol of Canada, a symbol of homelessness across Canada. And Canadians kind of have a rich history of trekking across the nation. And so we thought, boy, that would be interesting. That would be inspiring. And so that's what we did. Our goal was simple: is to push for change, to talk about some of the things that we can do to better support kids. And so from 2016 and 17, over 17 months, I walked 5,625 miles across the country. Now, to give you context, that's the distance from New York to LA, back to New York, with one Canadian winter thrown in there for character building.
My word.
And I was also a 49-year-old non-athlete at the time. So, yeah.
That is quite the trek. That's quite the journey.
It was, and when when you talk about kindness, oh my goodness, how people respond. I can't begin to think what it'd be like to lose my home, all my possessions. And when we turn on the news every night, we see what's going on in LA. Um, but because I'm not affected by that part of it, I am affected by seeing the absolute outflowing of support and human kindness, people driving across the country just to be there to try and support and help by providing their gifts and their time and their treasure. And so that's the piece that I really thoroughly enjoyed.
It's interesting at times of tragedy, setbacks, upending one's life completely. It's beautiful to see the best of humanity come out. I mean, yes, there are arsonists, and yes, there are looters, and yes, there are people that want to take advantage of that. But that's really in the minority, and they get, I think, a lot more media time. But there's so much more of people who are rolling up their sleeves and jumping in to help in whatever capacity they can, from physically helping to emotionally supporting, hugs, food, clothing, and so on. And the outpouring of the community is beautiful, even in a place as big as Los Angeles, which oftentimes is kind of this anonymous spread, like
Mhm.
this huge area, right? So I'm with you, Joe. I think the best of humanity seems to come out time and time again in times of crises.
Mhm.
But so, Joe, do you have any stories? Can you think of any or stories where someone has really stepped into the role of a kindness hero in your life? I think that isn't there a gentleman named Gus
Yeah.
who was
So
a
we would need to go back before we go forward. There were
let's go
tens
back.
of thousands of people who helped support the campaign. We had, just the list would be, it would take me hours to go through on how
Yeah,
many people
sure.
made the It wasn't about me, it was about community coming together as we slowly trekked across the country. But if we go back to the genesis of my transformation, in the when I was 22 years old, I was that guy disheveled, living under a bridge, pushing a shopping cart, struggled with my mental health, substance use disorder. And I sat down beside a man on a park bench and I got to know his name. His name was Gus, and he had these beautiful blue eyes. I'll never forget them. And he looked at me with this compassion and love. Got to know my name, and I remember he leaned in and he said to me, he says, Joe, he says, you got this homeless addiction thing going on. But if you were to get your life together, you could go out and do something fantastic. He said to me, he said, Joe, there's more to you than you can see. There's more to you than you can see. And for the first time in my life, someone other than my mom or my daddy spoke to my potential, my possibility. And right now, more than ever, the world needs to see possibility. I couldn't see it at the time. I can't imagine a family looking at a foundation where their fireplace is, and nothing else, and thinking, where do I go from here? But there is the next step. There is something beyond the tragedy and the challenge and all the stuff that we face in our world today. And that's what Gus spoke to me. And that was enough for me to get up off that park bench and slowly start taking some steps forward. I went to treatment. I went to college. I graduated. I went out into the business world. In less than 12 years, I was the Canadian version of the American dream. And it started with someone just saying something kind to me. You know, and I'll just wrap this idea. When we look nowadays and we look at the lean towards empathic leadership, I think the greatest thing that we can do as parents, community leaders, business leaders is to see possibility in the organizations and see possibility in the people around us and see possibility in ourselves. Because if we move that way, we got a half a shot at it. If we don't, if we get stuck in probability thinking, we will always get what we always got.
Isn't it interesting? What you've talked about is a paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have that paradigm shift to go from probability to possibility, where we are seeing the possibility in ourselves, in others, in the things that are going on around us. I love that. That's it, and you're exactly right. We live in a time when far too many people are focused and navel gazing at the probabilities, and not near enough are looking and thinking about what's possible and the
But
possibilities.
I think that's normal and natural because as human beings, when we hear something that threatens, we go into this fight or flight mode, and we get into the conservation of energy, and we assess risk. And so probability is past behavior, current capability and likelihood of success. Possibility is looking at the world like the Wright brothers did and said, I don't care if everybody doesn't believe in us. We're going to do this thing. 200 years ago, we didn't have electricity in our homes. And today you can go to outer space with Richard Branson if you have enough money. So possibility is all around us. It is the seeds of all innovation and change. I was that guy with the beard in the cart. And today, tomorrow I'm going to speak to a global enterprise here in Nashville. And the two are just, such a contrast. And yet possibility is as perennial as the grass is green, but it's hard and it takes courage. And it's not just this bumper sticker, turn your frown upside down. It takes enormous amount of leadership and courage to stand at the precipice of negative information and say, yes, but, these are the seeds that were sown into and inspire us so much in Dr. King's I Have a Dream, because it was pure possibility.
Joe, what motivates you every morning when you get out of bed and you are about to start your day? What gets your juices flowing to go out and slay the dragon and hit a home run, as we say?
A double espresso usually, but
beyond that,
yeah, I think it's the deep resonating passion to want to get people to stick their hand in their pocket and pull out this gift that's them. To see that they have it within them, if they have the courage to face and take a couple steps forward, to pass on that message Gus gave me. Since that day, I've shared that message with over 2 million people. And what's funny is that I'll run into people 10 years later and they'll say, Joe, you remember when you were at the da-da-da conference in Vegas, or da-da-da-da-da, I was going through this big thing with my mom and breast cancer, or I was going through a divorce, or we were a business challenge. And that really helped me. I think that's what it is for me, is just to be an encourager and to be that example, to say, hey, look, if I can do it, you can do it too. And encourage them to get up off their whatever proverbial bench they're on and take some steps forward.
Hello, my wonderful friends. Thank you for joining us today and for your listening attention as we take a short break to introduce you to our partners in kindness, Kindness Worldwide. I invite you to listen to this little video clip, and if what you hear resonates, please take the time to go and visit Kindness Worldwide and make a donation to help them in their mission to create cultures of kindness in communities around the world. No donation is too small, and every little bit helps. Thank you so much for your kindness.
When a wallet was returned just moments after it was lost, a purpose was found. This one act of kindness inspired the formation of the nonprofit Kindness Worldwide to create a culture of kindness in communities throughout the world. Kindness Week Worldwide mobilized the entire community in York, Pennsylvania, featuring initiatives and playbook programs including blood drives, kindness cards, K-12 and college students embracing kindness, and an innovative means of community policing, kindness citations. If something so magical can happen in York, Pennsylvania, the same and other inspirations can happen anywhere and everywhere. Our Screen Scenes initiative featuring the Kindness Factor will showcase these many stories of kindness. Let's include your community among them. Kindness is the heartbeat of the world. Together, with your support, we can make all its hearts beat as one.
That's beautiful.
This trek across Canada, I don't know the story, neither to our listeners. Did people know what you were doing?
Some did. There were circles where we were wider known. We had enormous support from law enforcement. So if you were in the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Toronto Police Service, they knew about it because they were supporting it. And then the community, like homeless shelters, health service and sciences, they knew about it. And some cities, there was more exposure because of community champions that hosted galas and events and fundraising for us. But there were other times where you'd be walking down the highway in the middle of nowhere and people would turn. It's funny because we actually created a little piece of print printed collateral that said, "What's with the cart?" And then it explained what it was that we were doing. But we had a little, a little enrollment thing that we explained to people what we were doing. And once they heard what we were doing, they were all for it.
Like, wow. It's a wonderful thing. You've used the word courage or encouragement multiple times in the last couple of minutes. And you're exactly right. You said it's not just a, sticker that says turn your frown upside down and everything's great, right? It does take a tremendous amount of courage, especially when we know, that there are people around us, even close family sometimes will often say, be naysayers and say, "Oh, you can't do that," or "What makes you think you can do that?" And it takes a tremendous amount of courage in the face of those statements or feelings or thoughts to say, "I have possibility. I can do this. I see the possibilities and I believe I can go forward," and then have the courage to take that leap and just do it, regardless of what others may say. You're a great example of that, Joe.
I think there's a lot of things in our world today that mug us of our possibility, and you have to guard it. I limit the amount of time I spend on social. I limit the amount of certain things that I expose myself to. And I also have really good people around me and accountability to protect, that possibility. But it's not, some days it's not easy. And I don't want to, sound trite, because it's not. It takes an enormous amount of effort to carry on some days, but it's worth it. And the change that we can create for ourselves, and the change that we can help others with is going back to your question, Doctor. That's what fires me up. That's my quote why.
I have a question for you regarding Gus. So this man with the beautiful blue eyes looked into your eyes as a homeless young man and saw your potential and saw things that obviously you weren't ready to see in yourself at the time. What was the process for you to get to the point where you believed the very words that Gus said about you? And how long did that take, just for our audience sake?
A decade. So I didn't get it right away. I was, I was struggling, but 3 weeks later, something really sort of tragic and beautiful happened. I was, struggling to get my next fix, so to speak, and I ended up selling the boots off my feet. And I remember walking down the street and I was completely broken. And I cried out for help, and I got the help I needed. My mom, supported me, got me into a detox facility, a full-time treatment center. But it wasn't until I started to get traction and then my emotional climate changed. And then I began to see what Gus had said. And slowly over time, it was revealed to me that what he spoke was such a universal truth, that we are so much more when we transcend ego, when we transcend self, when we transcend the stories of our youth, when we transcend this is the way it is, because it's never the way it is. It's always sort of in flex, if you want to sort of get woo-woo and sort of get into that quantum thing. But there was one day I remember, I'm driving a big car, I'm going into my office, this company that I helped build, and I remembered, and I drove past that bench, and I was like, it had hit me. He was right. And then it hit me again, because if it's right for me, it's right for everyone, because I'm not special. I am not, anybody listening to this thinks, oh, well, yeah, that's good for Joe, but not for me. All of us have that. It's a birthright to be able to shift. There is never a moment in our life where we cannot shift the way we think, the way we act, and alter our eventual outcomes. Never. Starting this moment, our future is spotless. And I never got to say thank you to Gus. But in tribute to him, I've written 4 books, and I've shared the message with, millions of people, trying to pass on that simple, statement or act of kindness that he gave me. Yeah, I'm here in Nashville. I passed a 77-year-old vet named Tony yesterday, and I stopped and I talked to him. And in so many words, again, plant that seed.
Isn't it amazing?
Hmm.
It's a perfect example of planting and growing. You plant the little seed and if you nurture it and water it and it grows up, the plant grows up and it's healthy. He planted that seed in you. And over time
Hmm.
you've nurtured it, you've watered it, and you've grown and it's grown. And the thing is, you're bearing fruit and giving that fruit to other people. You're not keeping that fruit to yourself. You're giving it to other people. The seeds that are in that fruit are being spread. From that one little seed, multiple seeds have been planted. What a beautiful thing. What a powerful example of the fact that through one simple act, the ripples can go out for decades or for hundreds of years. It just depends.
Well, if you look back at the origin story of any possibility, any great change maker, there was a moment.
Yep.
There was a moment when the music teacher inspired Beethoven. There was a moment when a teacher inspired Dr. Charles Best. There was a moment when, so there's always these moments in people. And we think to ourselves, I don't have much power in this, world full of all of this stuff that's, kind of scary. But we do. We do as parents, we do as leaders, we do as community members of faith groups. We have the power to be like Gus, and that's it right there.
Well,
Is to be like Gus in everything we do. And one of the biggest things too, Randy, for me, is to be kind to myself.
oh,
Because the
amen.
person I'm the worst to is me.
Well, you think about that. And I'm in the process of finishing up my newsletter for this week. And one of the things I wrote in there is we have to remember to be kind to the man or woman in the mirror.
Mhm.
Because if we're not kind to the man or woman in the mirror, we have a really hard time being kind to the people around us. It's hard to believe that the time has gone by so quickly. We could talk to you for a long time, which means that we're going to have you back as a guest again later.
I'd love that. We could unpack the push for change a little bit more and talk about some of the remarkable work we did with kids and schools and community responders. I'd welcome the opportunity. Um,
Well, and the great work that you're doing, pushing for change, you're pushing for kindness. Really, you're not talking about change that's going to make people's lives worse, right? You're talking about change that's going to make people's lives better.
I think the core and foundation, everything I'm trying to do is quite simply to be like Gus. And that's everywhere. That's at Starbucks in the morning. That's with my family. It's with my business endeavors and with my social and philanthropic work is to be like Gus.
That sums it up.
Mhm.
Well, we want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We want to thank our audience for taking the time to be with us today. Gus, one last thing before we go. If our audience wants to connect with you and learn more about you and your books, etc., where's the best place to send them to?
You just called me Gus, but I'm going to let that
Sorry,
slide.
Joe.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
Gus on the way. Okay, see, I can edit it all up.
No, leave it. Leave it. It's good. Skidrow CEO. If people just type me into Google, Joe Roberts. Best place to find me if you want to see me on a regular basis is LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, I've got a website, Skidrow CEO. There's also a website set up for the foundation called the Push for Change. But
Thank you so much, Joe, for taking the time to join us today. Thank you to our audience. We want to ask you, just to remind you really fast, take a few minutes at the end of listening to this. And by the way, thank you for taking the time to listen. You didn't have to listen to this, but we appreciate you doing that. And I invite you to take just a couple minutes and think, what did I learn? How is it applicable to me? And what am I going to do with it? And I can promise you, Joe dropped a bunch of golden nuggets in here that to share with us. I promise you, as you do that, it'll make a difference. Thanks for joining us. Take care.